Globish, 1,500 words. Able, capable of doing something, having the necessary skills or strength. For example, a person who is able can complete tasks efficiently. About, in or to various places in different parts of. It can also mean concerning or regarding a particular topic. For example, she was looking about for her lost keys. Above, located at a higher level than something else, over and not touching the surface. It can also denote superiority or excellence. For example, above the clouds or an above-average performance. Accept, to agree to receive, do, or experience something. For example, she accepted the invitation with pleasure. According to, following the information provided by someone or something else. For example, according to the latest report, the numbers have increased. Account, a record of financial transactions, a description or explanation. For example, he kept an account of his daily expenses. Accuse, to say formally that someone has done something wrong. For example, they accused him of theft. Achieve, to succeed in doing or accomplishing something difficult. For example, she achieved her goal after many years of hard work. Across, from one side to the other, on the opposite side. It can also mean throughout a period of time. For example, he walked across the street or changes across different cultures. Act, to do something with deliberate effort, to perform a role in a play or film. For example, she acts as the team leader or he acts in an important movie. Adapt, to change or adjust oneself or something to suit new conditions. For example, plants adapt to their environment over time. Add, to increase by including more, to include another element. For example, add sugar to sweeten the tea. Admit, to acknowledge formally or officially, to allow someone to enter a place. For example, he admitted to being wrong. Adult, a fully grown person who is not a child. It can also refer to someone capable of behaving responsibly. For example, an adult should take care of their children. Advertisement, a message intended to persuade people to buy or use something. For example, advertisements are seen in newspapers and on television. Advise, to give advice or recommendations, to suggest a course of action. For example, he advised her to take a break. Affect, to produce a change in someone's mood, feelings, or behavior. For example, stress can affect one's health. Afraid, feeling fear, terror, or dread. For example, she was afraid of the dark. After, following in time, later than something else. It can also mean behind or at a point farther back. For example, after dinner or the house is quiet after everyone has left. Again, a second or more time, once more. For example, they went to the park again today. Against, opposed to someone or something, in opposition. It can also mean touching but not passing over a surface. For example, she stood against the wall or they were against the idea. Age, the period of time from birth until death. An amount of time during which events occur. For example, she is 25 years old. Agency, an organization or body that has been given authority to perform certain actions. It can also refer to a government department. For example, a travel agency organizes trips for customers. Ago, a period of time in the past from now, previously. For example, it happened 5 days ago. Agree, to express agreement with something or someone. For example, they agreed on a plan. Ahead, in front of something else in the future. It can also mean before another event. For example, she looked ahead to her vacation or he ran ahead of his friends. Aid, help or support. Assistance given to someone. For example, medical aid is provided for the sick. Aim, a target or goal that one is trying to reach. For example, she aimed to win the championship. Air, the mixture of gases surrounding the earth. For example, we need clean air to breathe. Alive, having life, not dead. For example, plants are alive as long as they grow. All, every single one of a whole group or number without exception. For example, all students must attend class. Allow, to permit something to happen or be done. For example, parents allow their children to play outside. Ally, a person or country that is allied with another for mutual benefit. For example, they are allies in the fight against terrorism. Almost, very nearly, close but not quite. For example, she almost made it to work on time. Alone, by oneself, without any company. For example, he preferred to be alone after a long day. Along, following or alongside something. For example, they walked along the beach. Already, used when an event has taken place before another event in the past. For example, we have already finished our work. Also, in addition, furthermore. For example, he also enjoys playing music. Although, despite something being true or despite someone's beliefs. For example, although it was raining, they decided to go out. Always, at all times, constantly. For example, she always arrives on time. Among, in the midst of a group or number of things. For example, she is among the best students in her class. Amount, the quantity of something that can be measured or counted. For example, the amount of water in the tank. And, a conjunction used to join words, phrases, clauses, or sentences together. For example, I like apples and oranges. Anger, strong feelings of annoyance or frustration. For example, his anger grew as he waited for the results. Angle, the space between two lines or surfaces that meet at a point, a projection of a weapon. For example, she adjusted the angle of the camera to get a better shot. Announce, to make known officially or formally. For example, they announced the winner of the competition. Another, a different one, an additional one of the same type. For example, he needed another cup of coffee. Answer, the response given in reply to a question or request. For example, she gave a brief answer to his question. Any, used when referring to any member of a group without specifying which one. For example, has anyone seen the keys? Apartment, a self-contained living space within a building. For example, he lives in a small apartment. Apologize, to express regret or remorse for wrongdoing. For example, he apologized for being late. Appeal, to make a request or ask someone to do something. For example, she appealed to the court for help. Appear, to come into view, to become visible or noticeable. For example, the sun appeared after the rain stopped. Apple, a sweet, edible fruit of various tree species in the genus Malus. For example, an apple a day keeps the doctor away. Apply, to use for a particular purpose or effect. For example, she applied makeup before going out. Appoint, to assign someone to a position or task. For example, they appointed him as the new team leader. Approve, to give permission or agreement. For example, the board approved the project plan. Area, a particular part of a place, an expanse of space. For example, she explored a large area of the forest. Argue, to discuss matters with the intent to persuade someone. For example, they argued about the best approach to take. Arm, the human upper limb from the shoulder to the hand. For example, he used his arm to carry the box. Army, a large organized fighting force of a nation, land forces engaged in war. For example, the army is responsible for national defense. Around, located or positioned near, moving in a circle or curve. For example, they stood around the table. Arrest, to take into custody by legal authority, to detain someone suspected of committing a crime. For example, police arrested the suspect at the scene. Arrive, to reach a destination or place safely. For example, they arrived home after a long trip. Art, the expression or application of human creative skill and imagination. For example, painting is a form of art. As, used to introduce a phrase giving information about something. Used to indicate the capacity in which someone does an action. For example, she works as a teacher. Ask, to inquire about or request something from someone. For example, he asked for directions to the nearest cafe. Assist, to help or give support to someone. For example, they assisted the injured person with medical attention. At, used to indicate position, time, or location. For example, she works at the hospital. Attach, to fasten or join something to another object or place. For example, he attached a note to the envelope. Attack, to make an aggressive assault on someone or something. For example, the enemy attacked the city. Attempt, to make a try or effort to do something, to start doing something with the hope of completing it. For example, they attempted to climb the mountain. Attend, to be present at an event, meeting, or class, to pay attention to someone or something. For example, she attended the important meeting. Attention, the state of being mentally engaged and focused on a particular object, idea, or person. For example, the teacher gained their attention by speaking loudly. Authority, official power or control. For example, law enforcement has the authority to make arrests. Automatic, operating without external supervision. Happening naturally or automatically. For example, an automatic door opens when someone approaches it. Autumn, the season between summer and winter in the northern hemisphere, characterized by cooler temperatures and changing foliage. For example, autumn brings beautiful colors to the trees. Available, readily accessible or obtainable, not occupied or used at the moment. For example, the book is available for checkout from the library. Average, commonly representing a measure of central tendency in statistics, such as the mean, median, or mode. For example, the average temperature in July is 75 degrees F. Avoid, to keep away from, to prevent oneself from doing something. For example, he avoids eating too much sugar. Awake, mentally and physically active, not asleep. For example, she stayed awake all night working on her project. Award, a prize or honor given for achievement or excellence in a particular field. For example, the award went to the top performer of the year. Away, in or to a distance from a place, removed from someone's presence. For example, they moved away to start a new life. Baby, a very young human, especially one who has not yet learned to walk. For example, a newborn baby. Back, the part of the body behind the spine, also used to indicate returning to an earlier point or position. For example, she turned her back on him. Bad, poor in quality or condition, causing harm or distress. For example, the bad weather ruined their plans. Bag, a portable container with open ends and a carrying handle, often made of fabric. For example, a shoulder bag. Balance, to have equal amounts on both sides, to be steady and not tip over. Also, a state of equilibrium or stability. For example, she balanced the checkbook. Ball, a round object that can be thrown, kicked, or bounced. For example, a soccer ball. Ballot, a piece of paper or card on which votes are recorded, an official vote cast in an election. For example, they filled out their ballot for the upcoming election. Ban, to prohibit or forbid something. For example, the ban on smoking in public places. Bank, an institution that provides financial services such as deposits and loans. Also, the side of a river or body of water. For example, she walked along the bank of the river. Bar, a counter and stools at which drinks are served in a bar, also used to indicate the lengthwise support in an arch or vault. For example, he stood behind the bar serving drinks. Barrier, something that stops progress or movement. For example, a physical barrier blocking access to a building. Base, the bottom part of something from which it rises, also used to indicate a foundation or starting point. For example, the base of a mountain. Basket, a container made of wicker or similar material and used for carrying items. Also, any similar container with a handle or handles. For example, a basket for collecting fruit. Bath, the act of bathing in water, also refers to a tub filled with water for washing the body. For example, taking a bath every morning. Battle, a struggle or conflict between opposing forces, also used metaphorically. For example, the battle against disease. Be, to exist, to live. Also used as an auxiliary verb to form present tense and future tense. For example, she is beautiful present, she will be there future. Bear, a large carnivorous mammal with shaggy fur, also can mean to endure or carry. For example, a polar bear. Beat, to strike repeatedly, to defeat in competition. Also used as an auxiliary verb. For example, the heart beats regularly. Beauty, the quality of being attractive or pleasing, also refers to a beautiful object or person. For example, the beauty of nature. Because, a conjunction introducing a statement explaining a reason or cause. For example, he was late because of traffic. Become, to grow into or develop into something different from what one is. For example, she became a teacher. Bed, the place where someone sleeps, also used metaphorically to indicate the starting point. For example, she went to bed early. Beer, an alcoholic drink made from malted grain and hops, flavored with hops. For example, a cold beer on a hot day. Before, at an earlier time or position. For example, they arrived before noon. Begin, to start, to have the beginning of something. For example, he began his speech. Behind, located at the back or rear part of something. Also used to indicate past time. For example, she stood behind him. Believe, to accept as true or real, also used in a metaphorical sense. For example, she believed in the power of prayer. Bell, a metal object that produces sound when struck, also refers to any object producing a similar sound. For example, a church bell. Belong, to have membership in a particular group or place, also used in the past tense belonged. For example, the house belonged to her family. Below, in a lower position, at a lesser degree or level. For example, the temperature was below zero. Bend, to curve or fold, to stoop or bow one's body. Also used as an auxiliary verb. For example, she bent down to pick up the book. Beside, next to something, also used in a metaphorical sense. For example, he sat beside her on the bench. Best, the highest quality or degree of something, used as an adjective and adverb. For example, it is the best movie I've ever seen. Betray, to violate trust by disclosing secrets. To fail to support a friend or cause. For example, he betrayed his friend's trust. Better, a comparative form of good indicating something superior. Also used as an adjective and adverb. For example, the weather is better today. Between, in the area that separates two things or places, also used to indicate a choice between options. For example, it was placed between two books. Big, large in size or quantity, important or significant. Also used as an adjective and adverb. For example, he had a big house. Bill, a formal proposal for enactment by a legislature, also refers to a receipt for goods sold. For example, the bill was sent to the customer. Bird, a warm-blooded vertebrate animal having feathers, wings, except in some species, and a hard beak, also used as an adjective or noun. For example, a bird sings beautifully. Birth, the act of being born, the beginning of life, also refers to the day one is born. For example, her birth was celebrated with a party. Bit, a small piece or portion, a short time, also used as a verb meaning to take a small bite. For example, he took a bit of the cake. Bite, to use the teeth in a sharp, sudden movement, also refers to the act of taking a small mouthful. For example, she felt a sting from the bee's bite. Black, having no color or very dark color. also used as an adjective and noun. For example, black is my favorite color. Blade, a flat, edge-shaped part that forms the cutting edge of a tool or weapon, also refers to the leaf-like part of some plants. For example, the blade of a knife. Blame, to hold someone responsible for something, also used as an adjective and noun. For example, she blamed herself for the mistake. Blank, empty or unused, lacking any particular quality or content, also used to indicate a complete lack of thought or reaction. For example, a blank piece of paper. Blanket, a large, flat cloth used for covering one's body in bed or on the floor, also refers to a widespread effect. For example, they spread a blanket on the grass. Bleed, to lose blood from an open wound, also used as an adjective and noun. For example, he was bleeding from his injury. Blind, unable to see. Lacking sight, also used in other contexts such as blind alley. For example, a blind person uses a cane for mobility. Block, a solid piece of material, a unit of construction or traffic regulation, also refers to the cutting off of an action or flow. For example, she blocked the door with her bag. Blood, the red fluid that circulates in the veins and arteries of humans and animals, composed mainly of water, proteins, and cells. Also used metaphorically. For example, he lost a lot of blood in the accident. Blow, to cause to move or flow by means of an impulse of air, also refers to a strong gust of wind. For example, she felt a cold blow on her face. Blue, having the color between green and violet in the visible spectrum, also used as an adjective or noun. For example, he wears a blue shirt. Board, a flat piece of wood, also refers to a group of people who manage an organization. For example, the board voted on the new policy. Boat, a small vessel for traveling over water, also used in a broader sense. For example, they sailed their boat across the lake. Body, the physical structure or form of a person or animal, also refers to the human body as a whole. For example, she works out to keep her body healthy. Bomb, a weapon that explodes upon impact or after delay, also used metaphorically. For example, he dropped a bomb on their plans. Bone, a rigid organ in vertebrates that forms part of the skeleton and protects soft organs, also refers to something hard and inflexible. For example, she broke her arm bone. Bonus, additional money or benefits given as an extra reward, also used metaphorically. For example, a bonus for good performance. Book, a written document made up of many pages, also used in the plural form. For example, he read a book about history. Boot, a strong waterproof shoe with high sides reaching above the ankle, also refers to an electrical starter on a vehicle. For example, she put on her boots for hiking. Border, the edge or boundary line of an area, also used metaphorically. For example, he crossed the border into another country. Born, past participle of be, indicates someone who has come into existence. Also used in the past tense was born. For example, she was born in New York. Borrow, to take something from one person and return it to them later, also used metaphorically. For example, he borrowed a book from the library. Boss, a superior at work or in command of a group, also refers to a strong leader. For example, she reported directly to her boss. Both refers to two things taken together as one pair, also used to indicate all of two things. For example, they both went to the party. Bottle, a glass or plastic container for liquids, also refers to the shape of such a container. For example, he drank from a bottle of water. Bottom, the lowest part or side of something, also used figuratively. For example, she reached the bottom of her bag. Box, a rigid container made of wood, metal, or carton, also refers to any object with a box shape. For example, he packed his belongings in boxes. Boy, An unmarried young male human also can refer to a man who is still youthful in appearance and behavior. For example, the boy played soccer in the park. Boycott, to refuse to deal or trade with someone as an expression of protest, also refers to avoiding something for the same reason. For example, they boycotted the store after the incident. Brain, the organ in the head that processes information and controls actions, also used figuratively. For example, she uses her brain to solve problems. Brake, a device for slowing or stopping a vehicle by friction, also refers to something that stops movement. For example, he pressed the brake pedal. Branch, the main stem of a tree with smaller branches growing out from it, also used metaphorically. For example, she followed the branch of the river downstream. Brave, showing fearlessness in the face of danger or difficulty. Courageous. For example, he was brave enough to speak up. Bread, a food made from flour and water and baked in the oven, also refers to similar foods like rolls. For example, she spread butter on her bread. Break, to destroy the continuity or unity of something, to stop an action. Also used as an adjective indicating a short pause. For example, he broke his leg in the accident. Breathe, to take air into and expel from the lungs for respiration, also refers to a short pause or break. For example, she took a deep breath before speaking. Brick, a block of clay baked hard by fire, also used figuratively. For example, he built a wall with bricks. Bridge, an artificial passage over water or an obstacle, also refers to something connecting two things. For example, the bridge connected the two banks of the river. Brief, short and concise, lasting for only a short time, also used as an adjective indicating someone who is brief in speech. For example, she gave a brief explanation. Bright, shining with light or color, also used figuratively. For example, the bright sun made it hard to see. Bring, to carry something from one place to another, also refers to causing something to happen. For example, he brought flowers for her. Broad, wide in extent, extended in breadth, also used metaphorically. For example, a broad street. Broadcast, the act of transmitting a radio or television program to many listeners or viewers simultaneously. For example, the news was broadcast on all major networks. Brother, a male sibling, someone who shares the same parents as oneself. For example, he is my younger brother. Brown, having a color similar to that of roasted barley or certain shades of dried-up grass, also used as an adjective and noun. For example, she wore a brown coat. Brush, a small tool with stiff bristles for cleaning or painting, also refers to the act of cleaning or grooming with this tool. For example, he used a brush to clean his hair. Budget, a plan or estimate of income and expenditure over a period of time, also refers to the process of planning and managing funds. For example, she prepared a budget for her business. Build, to construct or put together something piece by piece, also means to develop or grow in strength or quality. For example, he built a house from scratch. Bullet, a small metal object that is fired from a gun, also refers to the projectile itself. For example, a bullet hit the target. Burn, to consume with fire, to cause pain or discomfort by being too hot, also used figuratively. For example, he got sunburned during his vacation. Burst, to break open or apart suddenly, especially as a result of pressure, also refers to an act of breaking loudly or violently. For example, the balloon burst when it was overinflated. Bury, to cover with earth or other material so that something is hidden from view, also used metaphorically. For example, they buried him in the local cemetery. Business, a commercial enterprise, trade, or occupation engaged in for profit, also refers to transactions and dealings. For example, she runs a successful business. Busy, occupied with much work or activity, engaged with many tasks at once. For example, he was busy all day with meetings. But, a conjunction used to introduce contrast. For example, I want to go, but I have homework. Butter, a soft yellow spread made from cream and churned into solid form, also refers to a similar substance or spreadable fat. For example, he put butter on his toast. Button, a small fastener used for closing or opening clothing, consisting of an eye and a shank, usually attached to the garment with a loop, buttonhole, or hook-and-eye closure. Also used figuratively. For example, she buttoned her jacket before going outside. Buy, to purchase or acquire something by payment, also refers to obtaining through exchange. For example, he bought a new car. Buy, used to indicate the means of accomplishing an action, also indicates proximity in time or position. For example, he arrived at the office by 8 a.m. Cabinet, a large piece of furniture with doors and drawers used for storing items, also refers to a group of high-ranking government officials. For example, she placed the files in the cabinet. Call, to telephone someone, also refers to the sound made by an animal or bird. For example, he called her on the phone. Calm, quiet and peaceful, not agitated. Also used as a verb meaning to make someone calm. For example, his calm demeanor reassured everyone. Camera, a device for recording images either digitally or on photographic film. For example, she took photos with her camera. Camp, a temporary settlement, especially one of tents, also refers to a group sharing common interests. For example, they set up camp in the forest. Campaign, a series of related political or military actions designed to achieve a specific goal, also used metaphorically for a sustained effort. For example, she launched a campaign for environmental awareness. Can, to be capable of doing something, also refers to a cylindrical metal container used for food storage. For example, he can open the can with a tin opener. Cancel, to rescind or revoke an action, appointment, or agreement. For example, they canceled their reservation. Capture, to take and hold someone or something by force, also means to seize or attract completely. For example, the soldiers captured the enemy fortress. Car, a motor vehicle used for transporting people or goods on roads. For example, he drives a car to work. Card, an individual piece of thin material used for various purposes such as playing cards, credit cards, or identity cards. Also refers to a flat piece of material folded in the middle. For example, she received a greeting card. Care, to look after someone or something with attention and diligence, also means concern or worry. For example, he cares for his elderly parents. Carriage, a vehicle drawn by horses, used especially in the past as public transport, also refers to an enclosed space within such vehicles. For example, a passenger carriage on a train. Carry, to bear something physically, also means to support or convey ideas or emotions. For example, he carried the heavy box upstairs. Case, a specific instance of events or circumstances, also refers to a protective cover for an object. For example, she considered each case carefully. Cash, currency in the form of banknotes and coins, also used informally as a verb meaning to pay by cash. For example, he paid his bill with cash. Cat, a domesticated carnivorous mammal often kept as a pet. For example, her favorite cat is black. Catch, to seize or capture something, also means to attract the attention of someone. For example, she caught the ball in midair. Cause, the agent producing an effect, also refers to the reason for an event. For example, lack of rain was the cause of the drought. Celebrate, to mark an occasion or anniversary with festivities and activities, also means to express strong approval or admiration. For example, they celebrated their victory with a party. Cell, a small enclosed space, also refers to a compartment in a honeycomb or in a battery. For example, bees build cells for storing honey. Center, the middle point of an object, also used figuratively to refer to the most important part or aspect of something. For example, the center of the city is bustling with activity. Century, a period of 100 years. For example, the 21st century began in the year 2001. Ceremony, a formal and usually elaborate procedure to mark a special event or occasion. For example, they held a ceremony for their wedding anniversary. Certain, specifically defined, not left to chance or the discretion of others. Also used as an adjective indicating something is sure or certain. For example, she was certain of his honesty. Chain, a series of things linked together, also refers to a continuous sequence or succession. For example, he wore a chain around his neck. Chair, an article of furniture with a raised seat supported by one or more legs, and usually having no back or one in the form of an upright rod. Also used figuratively for a position of authority or responsibility. For example, she sat in the chair at the head of the table. Chairman, a person who presides over a meeting, also refers to someone holding a position of leadership. For example, he is the chairman of the board. Challenge, a demand that something be done, also means a test or threat requiring one's efforts to overcome. For example, she accepted the challenge to run a marathon. Champion, someone who fights for an idea or cause, someone who achieves victory in a contest or competition. For example, he is a champion runner. Chance, the possibility of something happening, also used as a verb meaning to take risks. For example, she took a chance and applied for the job. Change, to alter something by substituting another thing or making additions or modifications. Also means to exchange money for smaller denominations. For example, he changed his large bill at the counter channel, a specific frequency used for radio or television broadcasting. Also refers to a waterway. For example, they tuned their TV to a different channel. Character, the combination of traits and qualities that form one's moral and psychological makeup, also refers to a person in a story or play. For example, she is a complex character in the novel. Charge, to connect an electrical device with a power source for recharging, also means to accuse someone of wrongdoing. For example, he charged his phone before leaving home. Chart, a diagram representing data visually, also refers to maps or diagrams used by sailors and pilots. For example, she uses navigation charts when sailing. Chart, a diagram representing data visually, also refers to maps or diagrams used by sailors and pilots. For example, she uses navigation charts when sailing. Chase, to pursue someone or something with intent to capture, also means to follow closely, often metaphorically. For example, he chased the ball across the field. Cheap, having a low price, inexpensive but of poor quality or value, also used as an adjective for something easily obtained. For example, she bought cheap shoes. Check, to examine carefully for accuracy and correctness, also refers to a written instrument ordering a bank to pay a specified amount of money. For example, he checks his email regularly. Cheer, to express joy and encouragement, also means to strengthen or encourage someone. For example, she cheered the team on during the game. Cheese, a food made from curdled milk, often aged or flavored. For example, he enjoyed a slice of cheese with his sandwich. Chemical, pertaining to chemistry, relating to the composition and structure of substances and their interactions with each other. Also refers to a substance used in reactions or processes. For example, she uses chemicals for cleaning. Chest, the part of the body between the neck and the abdomen, also refers to a large storage container. For example, he opened his chest to find his favorite book. Chief, a person who holds high rank or office, someone with authority over others. Also used as an adjective meaning main or primary. For example, she is the chief officer of the department. Child, a young human being, especially one below the age of puberty. For example, her child is learning to read. Choose, to select from a number of options. Also means to make a decision after careful consideration. For example, he chose the red car over the blue one. Church, a building for public worship and religious services, also refers to the Christian religion or its adherents. For example, they went to church on Sunday. Circle, a shape formed by all points at a fixed distance from a given point, also used figuratively to mean a group of people with common interests. For example, she drew a circle around the correct answer. Citizen, a person who has the rights and duties of membership in a state or country. For example, he is a proud citizen of his country. City, a large human settlement that functions as a center for trade, industry, culture, etc. For example, she visited the city for a business meeting. Civilian, a non-combatant, someone who is not a member of the armed forces. Also used to describe things belonging to ordinary citizens. For example, he helped injured civilians after the disaster. Claim, to assert or demand something as one's right or property, also means to take possession of something. For example, she claimed her seat on the airplane. Clash, a collision or conflict between objects, also refers to a disagreement in opinion or interests. For example, the two teams clashed during the match. Class, a group of students assembled for instruction by one teacher, also used figuratively to mean a rank or category. For example, she is in her final year class. Clean, free from dirt or stains, free from pollution or contamination, also means to remove dirt from something. For example, he kept the kitchen clean and tidy. Clear, transparent and free from haze, also used figuratively to mean easily understood or comprehended. For example, she gave a clear explanation of her idea. Climate, the general atmosphere and weather conditions in a region over an extended period. Also refers to long-term patterns of temperature, humidity, etc. For example, the climate here is quite warm. Climb, to move upward or ascend, also used figuratively to mean overcoming obstacles. For example, he climbed to the top of the mountain. Clock, a device for measuring and indicating time, also refers to a dial with hands that show hours and minutes. For example, she set her clock for 7 a.m. Close, to bring together the parts of something separated so as to prevent anything from passing through or into it. Also means nearby in space or position. For example, he closed the door quietly. Cloth, a flexible material made by weaving fibers, also refers to a piece of such material used for cleaning or wiping. For example, she wiped the table with a cloth. Cloud, a visible mass of condensed water droplets suspended high in the atmosphere above the Earth's surface. Also refers to uncertainty or confusion. For example, they were lost in the clouds during the discussion. Coal, a black solid fossil fuel formed by the decomposition of plant matter under heat and pressure over millions of years. Also refers to the material used for heating. For example, he uses coal to keep his home warm. Coast, the land bordering a sea, lake, or river, also means the shore of an inland body of water. For example, they built their house on the coast overlooking the sea. Coat, an outer garment worn over other clothes for warmth or protection from rain and wind. Also refers to any protective covering. For example, she put on a coat before going out. Code, a system or method used to convey information in secret or in an abbreviated form, also refers to rules or regulations. For example, he wrote the code for the new software. Cold, having or characterized by a low temperature, also means not emotionally warm. For example, she drank a cold drink on a hot day. Collect, to gather items together as a group, also means to accumulate money or support for a specific purpose. For example, they collected donations for the charity. College, a place of higher education offering courses leading to a degree, but not as extensive as those in a university. Also refers to an association within a larger organization. For example, she attended a community college. Colony, a group of people living outside their native country or state, also means a population living under the rule of another. For example, he studied the history of the colony. Color, the visual sensation evoked in the eye by waves of electromagnetic radiation within the visible spectrum, also refers to a pigment used for coloring materials. For example, she chose a color scheme for her painting. Combine, to unite or join together into one whole, also means to mix thoroughly. For example, they combined their efforts to complete the project. Come, to move toward a place nearer oneself, also means to happen or arrive at a time. For example, she came just in time for the meeting. Comfort, a state of ease and freedom from pain or difficulty, also refers to something that gives relief or pleasure. For example, he found comfort in his favorite chair. Command, to give orders or issues of authority, also means control or mastery over a situation. For example, she commanded the army with great skill. Comment, an opinion given about something, also refers to an observation or remark. For example, he gave a comment on the news report. Committee, a group appointed to consider and report on some matter, also means the members of such a group collectively. For example, the committee discussed the proposal. Common, shared by two or more, not special or extraordinary. Also used as an adjective meaning ordinary or popular. For example, they used common sense to solve the problem. Communicate, to exchange information, ideas, or feelings with others, also means to make known or publicize something. For example, she communicated her thoughts clearly. Community, a group of people living in the same area and having a common culture or interests, also refers to a society organized into groups with specific functions. For example, they were part of the community center. Company, a business enterprise, also means a group of people gathered together for some purpose. For example, she works for a big company. Compare, to consider two or more things in order to find their similarities and differences. Also means to estimate the relative value of something. For example, he compared prices before buying the item. Compete, to strive to gain an advantage over others. Also refers to engaging in a contest with another person or group. For example, they competed in the race. Complete, to finish or bring to an end, also means to make something whole and perfect. For example, she completed her task on time. Compromise, an agreement reached by making concessions from each side's position, also means a settlement of differences by mutual sacrifice. For example, they reached a compromise in their negotiations. Computer, a machine that can be programmed to accept data, process it, and store the results for future use, also refers to a person who computes numbers or data. For example, she uses her computer to manage her work. Concern, to involve or affect someone, also means worry or anxiety about something. For example, his health concerns him greatly. Condemn, to express strong disapproval of something, also means to pronounce formally as worthy of blame. For example, they condemned the unethical practices. Condition, the state or quality of being in a particular condition, also refers to an influencing factor. For example, her health condition improved after treatment. Conference, a formal meeting of people for discussion and exchange of ideas, also means a period during which such meetings are held. For example, they attended a conference on technology. Confirm, to make certain or sure about something by providing evidence, also means to state formally as true. For example, she confirmed the appointment with her boss. Congratulate, to express joy at someone's good fortune or success, also means to praise someone for an achievement. For example, they congratulated him on his promotion. Congress, a formal assembly of representatives from different states or countries to discuss matters and make laws, also refers to the building in which such a meeting is held. For example, she attended Congress to speak about education reform. Connect, to join or link two or more things together, also means to communicate with someone electronically or otherwise. For example, he connected his phone to the Wi-Fi network. Consider, to give careful thought to something before taking action, also means to regard as being of a particular type. For example, she considered her options carefully. Consumption, the process of using up materials in order to obtain what they contain or to make them fit for use, also refers to the amount used or eaten during a certain period. For example, he measured his daily consumption of water. Contact, to reach another person through telephone, email, etc., also means physical touch or connection. For example, she kept in contact with her friends via social media. Contain, to hold something within its boundaries, also means to include or have as a part. For example, the container contains water and other ingredients. Continent, a large land mass of the earth, also refers to a distinct region within a country. For example, she visited Europe, one of the continents. Continue, to keep doing something without stopping, also means to extend or last for some time longer. For example, he continued his education after graduation. Control, to have influence over someone or something, also means to manage or direct a situation. For example, she controlled her temper during the argument. Cook, to prepare food by applying heat, also refers to a person who cooks in professional settings like restaurants. For example, he is a skilled cook. Cool, having or characterized by low temperature, also used figuratively to mean calm and collected. For example, she felt cool after taking deep breaths. Cooperate, to work with others for a common goal, also means to assist each other in achieving something. For example, they cooperated on the project successfully. Copy, an exact duplicate of an original document or image, also refers to reproducing material from one source to another. For example, she copied her essay onto a new page. Cork, a stopper for bottles, especially wine bottles, also refers to a small piece of soft wood used as insulation or padding. For example, he inserted the cork into the bottle. Corn, a cereal plant that is widely cultivated and its seeds used as food, also refers to the seeds themselves. For example, she planted corn in her garden. Corner, the point where two lines meet or intersect to form a right angle, also means an edge or extremity of something. For example, he stood at the corner of the street. Correct, free from error or defect, accurate and precise. Also used as an adjective meaning proper or fit. For example, she corrected her mistakes in the test. Cost, the amount required to buy or produce something, also means costliness or expense. For example, he calculated the cost of the trip. Cotton, a soft, fluffy material made from fibers of cotton plant used for cloth and clothing, also refers to the plant itself. For example, she wears a shirt made of cotton. Count, to determine the number of, also means to regard as important or significant. For example, he counted his blessings after escaping danger. Country, a distinct nation having its own territory, government, and constitution. also refers to a native land or homeland. For example, she is a citizen of her country. Course, a planned program of study in an educational institution, also means a series of actions designed to achieve an aim. For example, he took a course on history. Court, a tribunal where legal matters are brought for judgment and decision, also refers to the building housing such tribunals. For example, she went to court for her case. Cover, to place something over or around so as to conceal or protect it, also means to deal with in writing or speech. For example, he covered his head with a hat. Cow, a large quadrupedal mammal of the genus Bos, kept for its milk and flesh, also refers to the flesh of such an animal used as food. For example, she milks the cow every day. Crash, a loud noise produced by something falling or breaking with force, also means a sudden collision between objects or vehicles. For example, there was a crash during the storm. Create, to cause to exist, especially bringing together separate elements into a unified whole, also means to produce as an artist or writer. For example, she created a beautiful painting. Credit, a right to payment for goods or services rendered, also refers to trustworthiness or reputation. For example, he has good credit with the bank. Crew, the entire body of persons employed in operating a ship or aircraft, also means a group of people working together on one task. For example, she is part of the crew on the airplane. Crime, an illegal act punishable by law, also refers to the person who commits such an act. For example, he committed a crime and was arrested. Crisis, a time or period of great danger or difficulty requiring urgent action, also refers to a turning point in events or circumstances. For example, they faced a crisis during the emergency. Criteria, standards against which something can be judged or measured, also means the plural of criterion. For example, she followed the criteria set for the project. Criticize, to analyze and comment on someone's work with reference to its shortcomings or faults, also means to express disapproval. For example, he criticized the movie for its poor plot. Crop, the plants grown in a field as an agricultural produce, also refers to the yield of such plants. For example, she harvested her crop at the end of summer. Cross, a shape consisting of two bars or lines intersecting each other, also means something that divides into two branches or directions. For example, there is a crosswalk near the school. Crowd, many people assembled together in one place, also refers to a large number of things gathered together. For example, she joined the crowd at the concert. Crush, to press or squeeze something until it breaks up into small fragments, also means to overwhelm someone with pressure or force. For example, he crushed the can and threw it away. Cry, to make a loud noise indicative of distress or pain, also refers to tears flowing from eyes. For example, she cried during the emotional scene in the movie. Culture, the beliefs, customs, arts, etc., characteristic of a particular people or society, also means the process by which one is mentally and morally developed. For example, her cultural background influenced her art. Cup, a small hollow vessel with sides and an opening for drinking from it, also refers to any object with such shape. For example, she drank coffee from a cup. Cure, to treat or relieve someone of sickness or injury, also means the treatment used. For example, he found a cure for his cold. Current, something that is happening now or in progress at the present time, also refers to a flow of liquid or gas. For example, she reads the current news daily. Custom, a way of doing things established by usage and tradition, also means a particular mannerism or habit. For example, he followed local customs during his visit. Cut, to separate something into pieces with an edged tool such as a knife, also refers to an injury on skin. For example, she cut the vegetables for dinner. Damage, injury or harm caused to a living thing or property, also refers to the state of being injured. For example, the storm caused significant damage to the house. Dance, to move rhythmically and usually to music, also means a social gathering where people dance. For example, they enjoyed dancing at the party. Danger, a possibility of suffering harm or injury, also refers to something that may cause loss or damage. For example, he faced danger during his adventure. Dark, lacking light. Not bright, gloomy. Also used figuratively to mean mysterious or hard to understand. For example, she walked in the dark forest at night. Date, a specific day and month or both of a particular year. Also refers to an appointment for a social gathering, usually romantic. For example, they went on a date last weekend. Daughter, a female offspring of parents, also used metaphorically to mean someone's spiritual or intellectual child. For example, she is the daughter of her father's work ethic. Day, any of the periods into which time is divided by the passage of 24 hours, also refers to a period over which an event occurs. For example, they worked for 3 days on the project. Dead, lacking life or any vital sign, no longer alive, also means not functioning as expected. For example, she felt dead tired after her long shift. Deaf, unable to hear. Lacking auditory sense, also used figuratively to mean unable to understand clearly. For example, he is deaf to criticism. Deal, a bargain or agreement, also refers to handling or managing something. For example, they made a deal with the supplier. Dear, expensive and of high quality, also means cherished or loved. For example, she bought a dear watch as a gift for her husband. Debate, to discuss a topic thoroughly in order to reach an agreement, also refers to a formal discussion between 2 or more people with opposing views. For example, they debated the pros and cons of the new policy. Debt, money owed by one person to another, also means anything that is due from one person to another as a matter of duty or law. For example, he owes a debt of gratitude to his mentor. Decide, to determine or settle a question, to make up one's mind about something. For example, they decided on the best course of action. Declare, to announce formally, also means to state openly and explicitly. For example, she declared her independence from the group. Decrease, to become less in amount or size, to diminish or reduce. For example, he noticed a decrease in sales this quarter. Deep, extending far downward or backward or inward, profound in nature. Also used figuratively to mean intense or profound. For example, she felt deep sorrow after losing her friend. Defeat, the act of defeating someone or something in combat, contest, etc. Also means the condition of being defeated. For example, they suffered a defeat in the match. Defend, to protect someone against attack, to argue on behalf of something or someone. For example, he defended his position during the debate. Define, to give the meaning of, to describe exactly. For example, she defined the word for her students. Degree, a level in a scale of intensity or amount, also refers to an academic qualification. For example, he earned a degree in computer science. Delay, to put off until later, to hinder or prevent from moving forward. For example, the traffic caused a delay in their journey. Delicate, sensitive and easily damaged, also means subtle and refined. For example, she handled the delicate vase carefully. Deliver, to bring something safely to someone, also means to hand over something. For example, he delivered the package on time. Demand, a request or order that requires immediate attention, also refers to a requirement or need. For example, they met the demand for more staff. Demonstrate, to show by means of action or experiment, also means to prove by reasoning. For example, she demonstrated the steps in performing CPR. Denounce, to express strong disapproval of someone or something, also means to formally condemn. For example, they denounced the unfair practices. Deny, to refuse to admit the truth of something, also means to reject a claim or charge. For example, he denied the accusations made against him. Departure, the act of departing from a place, also refers to the time when someone leaves. For example, her departure was delayed due to bad weather. Depend, to rely on someone or something for support, also means to trust in or count upon. For example, she depends on her team for success. Deploy, to put into action or use, also refers to the act of positioning troops or equipment for a specific purpose. For example, they deployed additional resources to handle the crisis. Depression, a condition characterized by persistent sadness and loss of interest in normally enjoyable activities, also means a state of low pressure in weather systems. For example, she suffers from clinical depression. Describe, to give a detailed account of someone or something, also refers to sketching an outline for someone else to visualize. For example, he described the scene at the accident site. Desert, a barren area where little rain falls and few plants grow, also means to abandon someone or something. For example, they traversed a vast desert. Design, to plan out carefully in advance, also refers to a detailed plan for making some object or structure. For example, she designed a new app interface. Desire, a feeling of wanting something strongly, also means the thing desired. For example, he has a strong desire to learn a new language. Destroy, to damage or ruin completely, to bring about total destruction. For example, they destroyed the building during the fire. Detail, an important part of a whole, also refers to providing specific information in great depth. For example, she provided detailed instructions for the project. Develop, to grow and progress, also means to produce or create something. For example, they developed new technology for better efficiency. Device, a tool or instrument invented for a particular purpose, also means a means of doing something. For example, he used a device to measure temperature. Die, to cease to live, to become lifeless, also refers to the state of being dead. For example, she watched her favorite actor die in the movie. Diet, the food and drink consumed by an individual or group, also means a regimen of eating particular kinds of food. For example, he followed a strict diet for weight loss. Differ, to be dissimilar or not agree with someone else's opinion, to be distinct from another person's views. For example, they differed on the best approach to the problem. Difficult, not easy, hard and requiring much effort, also means complicated in nature. For example, she found it difficult to balance work and family life. Dig, to remove earth with a tool such as a spade or shovel, also refers to the act of excavating. For example, he dug a hole for the new fence post. Dinner, the main evening meal, also used more generally to mean any midday or evening meal. For example, they had an early dinner before going out. Diplomat, a person employed by one country in another to promote its interests and protect citizens, also means a person skilled at diplomacy. For example, he is a seasoned diplomat. Direct, to give orders to someone with authority, also means to guide or lead something along a chosen course. For example, she directed the actors on stage. Dirt, soil in an unclean state, also refers to anything that soils. For example, she cleaned her hands of dirt after working in the garden. Disappear, to cease to be visible or otherwise noticeable, to become lost or hidden from view. For example, he watched as the object disappeared into thin air. Discover, to make a finding previously unknown, also means to find out by investigation. For example, they discovered a new species of plant. Discuss, to talk about something in order to reach an agreement, also refers to having informal conversation on a topic. For example, they discussed the latest news over coffee. Disease, any deviation from physical or mental health that causes pain, illness, or abnormal functioning, also means a medical condition affecting living organisms. For example, she suffers from a chronic disease. Disk, a flat circular plate-like object, also refers to a storage device for computers and other electronics. For example, he used a disk to store his photos. Dismiss, to send away someone permanently or temporarily, also means to cancel something without fulfilling it. For example, the manager dismissed the employee for poor performance. Dispute, a disagreement between people on any matter, also refers to an argument or debate over a topic. For example, they had a dispute over who was responsible for cleaning the kitchen. Distance, the space between two things measured in linear feet, miles, etc., also means a psychological or emotional separation. For example, she traveled a great distance to meet her friend. Divide, to separate into parts, to distribute among several people. For example, they divided the cake equally among the guests. Do, to perform an action, also refers to accomplishing something by exertion of physical force or mental effort. For example, she does housework every day. Doctor, a person who studies medicine and treats illness in humans, also means a specialist doctor dealing with particular body parts or diseases. For example, he is a doctor specializing in cardiology. Document, something that serves as proof of something official, also refers to a written statement or record. For example, she signed the important document. Dog, a domesticated carnivorous mammal kept for protection and companionship, also means the breed of such an animal. For example, she owns a loyal dog. Door, a hinged movable structure that closes off an entrance to any room or building, also refers to the opening in walls through which it can be accessed. For example, he opened the door to let the cat out. Doubt, to be uncertain of something's truth, to think that a statement is not true. For example, she doubted his claim about the event. Down, in or to a lower position, in a state of dejection, also means against someone's wishes. For example, he fell down when slipping on ice. Drain, to empty out something by siphoning off its contents, also refers to a channel for waste water, to become exhausted. For example, she drained the bathtub and refilled it with fresh water. Draw, to produce or trace the figure of something using pencil, pen, etc., also means to attract. For example, he drew a beautiful landscape. Dream, a series of thoughts, images, and emotions occurring involuntarily in the mind during certain stages of sleep, also refers to an ideal or aspiration for the future. For example, she dreamed of becoming an astronaut. Dress, to put on clothing, also means women's undergarments, a style of women's clothes with a skirt or bustle. For example, she dressed in her best attire for the party. Drink, to take in liquid through the mouth, also refers to alcoholic beverage. For example, he drank water after exercising. Drive, to control and operate an automobile, also means to exert mental pressure on someone. For example, she drove the car carefully on the highway. Drop, a small quantity of a liquid that has fallen or been let fall from a height, also refers to lower in position by a short distance, to cause something to fall. For example, he dropped the ball and it fell into the basket. Drug, any substance taken to alter someone's state for medicinal purposes, medicine, or recreationally, narcotics, also means to administer such substances. For example, she took a painkiller drug to relieve her headache. Dry, lacking moisture, not wet, also refers to becoming dry and hard by exposure to air after having been moist. For example, the cloth dried in the sun. During, while something is happening or while a period of time elapses, at the time when something happens. For example, he worked during his vacation. Each, one at a time, every single one of a group. For example, she gave each child a candy. Ear, the organ of hearing and balance in humans or other vertebrates. For example, he turned his ear towards the sound. Early, happening or done at an early time, not delayed. For example, they arrived early for the meeting. Earn, to acquire by one's own efforts, especially through labor. For example, she earned a good salary from her job. Earth, the solid part of our planet where we live, the soil in which plants grow. For example, he planted seeds in the earth. East, one of the 4 cardinal points relative to the position of the sun at noon. For example, the sun rises in the east. Easy, not difficult, requiring little effort or skill. For example, it was easy to use the new software. Eat, to consume food for nutrition and energy. For example, she ate a healthy breakfast. Edge, the outer boundary of an object or area. For example, he walked along the edge of the cliff. Education, the process of learning or being taught knowledge, skills, values, and habits. For example, she received excellent education from her alma mater. Effect, a result produced by something else. Also refers to a noticeable change in circumstances. For example, his speech had a profound effect on the audience. Effort, the act of doing or trying to do something with energy and force. For example, he made an effort to learn a new language. Egg, a reproductive body produced by birds and some other animals, also refers to the food derived from this. For example, she cracked an egg into a bowl. Either, one or the other of 2 options, used for emphasis. For example, you can have tea or coffee. It is up to you either way. Elastic, capable of stretching and returning to its original shape, having flexibility. For example, rubber bands are elastic. Electricity, an electrical phenomenon produced by the flow or accumulation of electric charge. For example, she turned on the lights using electricity. Element, a fundamental principle or ingredient in something, an essential part of a system. For example, oxygen is an element essential for life. Else, another, used to introduce another possibility, used when referring to alternatives. For example, he didn't bring either his book or his notebook, but instead brought something else. Embassy, a diplomatic mission in a foreign country, the official residence of a diplomat. For example, the embassy staff works closely with local government officials. Emergency, an unforeseen development that creates an urgent situation requiring immediate action. For example, they prepared for an emergency evacuation plan. Emotion, any one of a broad range of powerful and significant feelings such as love or hate. For example, she expressed deep emotion during her speech. Employ, to use someone's services in return for wages or salary, also means to be engaged by a person or company. For example, he employed a new assistant for the office. Empty, having nothing inside or present, not occupied or filled. For example, she emptied the glass of water. End, the final part, the conclusion or termination. For example, the story came to an end with a happy ending. Enemy, someone who actively opposes another person or group. For example, he considered the neighboring country his enemy in the war. Enforce, to put into effect by authority and force of law. For example, the authorities enforced strict traffic laws in the city. Engine, a machine that produces power from fuel, also refers to an automotive engine. For example, she revved up the engine before starting her car. Enjoy, to take pleasure in doing something or having something done for you. For example, he enjoyed a day at the beach with his family. Enough, sufficient in quantity or degree, not requiring any more. For example, that was enough time to complete the task. Enter, to go into or come into some place or situation. For example, she entered the building through the main door. Entertain, to provide amusement or pleasure, also means to keep someone's attention with something interesting. For example, he entertained his friends with stories from his travels. Environment, the world and everything in it, especially the conditions that surround a person, animal, or community. For example, they are working to protect the environment. Equal, identical in quantity, size, degree, or value, not superior or inferior to another. For example, both siblings received an equal share of their inheritance. Equate, to consider as being the same as or equivalent to something else, to make something the same. For example, she equated her success with hard work and determination. Equipment, the tools and instruments required for a particular task or sport. For example, he brought all the necessary equipment for camping. Erase, to remove writing from paper, also means to do away with or get rid of something. For example, he erased the mistake on his tablet screen. Escape, to leave a place secretly and quickly, especially when not allowed to go. For example, she tried to escape from prison but was caught by guards. Especially, above all. In particular, for example, they focused especially on improving customer service. Establish, to set up or put into effect officially, to found or institute. For example, he established a new business with his savings. Estimate, to judge roughly the size, amount, or value of something, also means to form an opinion about someone's character. For example, she estimated the cost of the repairs at $500. Ethnic, relating to or based on race and nationality. For example, he is proud of his ethnic heritage. Evaporate, to turn into a gas by passing heat through it, also refers to disappearing gradually, especially when something becomes less obvious over time. For example, the puddle evaporated under the hot sun. Even, used for emphasis or contrast, sometimes, used in mathematics to mean with no remainder. For example, she was even more surprised by the outcome of the experiment. Event, a happening that takes place at a particular time and has definite beginnings and ends, also refers to an important occasion or celebration. For example, he attended a significant event honoring his achievements. Ever, used for emphasis in questions and statements to refer to any time. For example, have you ever been to Paris? Every, each one taken individually from a group of two or more, at each interval of something that occurs regularly. For example, she visits her family every weekend. Evidence, something that proves or disproves the existence of an alleged fact. For example, his testimony served as strong evidence in the trial. Evil, morally bad and likely to cause harm. For example, he believed the actions were driven by evil intentions. Exact, precisely correct, accurate in every detail. For example, she gave him exact instructions for the project. Example, an instance or specimen that serves as a typical illustration of something else. For example, he used a famous historical event as an example to explain his point. Except, not including, other than. For example, everyone went to the party except her. Exchange, to give and receive something with another person in exchange for something else. For example, she exchanged money at the airport. Excuse, something said or done to justify or explain a fault or offense, an apology. For example, he made an excuse for being late to work. Execute, to carry out officially or formally, also means to kill someone as a legal punishment. For example, they executed the plan perfectly. Exercise, an activity involving physical exertion done to maintain or improve health and agility, also refers to using one's mind. For example, he exercises regularly to stay fit. Exist, To live in actuality, not be imaginary or illusory. For example, life exists on Earth. Exit. The means by which someone leaves a place, the opposite of entrance. For example, she exited the building through the side door. Expand. To increase in size, volume, scope, etc., to enlarge or broaden something. For example, he expanded his business into new markets. Expect. To look for as certain or probable, also means to think or believe that someone will be present at a particular time. For example, she expected her package to arrive today. Expense. The cost incurred in the pursuit of an activity or the purchase of something. For example, traveling was expensive due to high fuel prices. Experience. A real or imagined event or sequence of events. The knowledge gained by actually doing something rather than just being taught it. For example, she gained valuable experience through her internship. Experiment. An attempt to learn something new by trying out a method or idea. For example, they conducted an experiment to test the effectiveness of a new drug. Expert. Someone with special knowledge or ability in some field. Someone who is very experienced and skilled at something. For example, she consulted an expert on child psychology for advice. Explain. To make clear by giving information about something. Also means to give reasons for doing something. For example, he explained the concept clearly to his students. Explode. To break up or burst into pieces with a loud noise. To suddenly increase in size or extent. For example, the bomb exploded in the explosion. Explore. To investigate and study some area or subject thoroughly. Also means to travel through an unknown region for the purpose of discovery. For example, they explored the ancient ruins. Export. The act of sending goods out of a country for sale abroad. Also refers to selling goods outside one's own country. For example, she exported her handmade crafts to different countries. Express. To communicate feelings or ideas by words or gestures. Also means to convey in writing or print. For example, he expressed his gratitude through a letter. Extend. To make something longer, wider, etc., to last for a period of time longer than usual. For example, she extended her stay at the hotel for an extra night. Extra. In addition, additional. For example, they ordered extra drinks for their guests. Extreme. Extending to the greatest possible degree, very strong or intense. For example, he faced extreme cold during his trip to the Arctic. Eye. The organ of sight in humans and other vertebrates consisting of a lens and a retina containing light-sensitive elements. Also refers to a small opening for looking through or a center of attention. For example, she used her eyes to focus on the details of the painting. Face. The front part of the human head from which the eyes, nose, and mouth project. Also refers to a person's appearance or expression. For example, she turned her face towards him. Fact. A statement that can be verified as true, something known to have happened or existed. For example, he presented a fact about the history of the city. Factory. A building where goods are made on a large scale by laborers. For example, the factory produces cars efficiently. Fail. To not succeed in accomplishing something. Also means to come short of some standard or requirement. For example, she failed her exam due to poor preparation. Fair. Just and impartial, free from bias. Also refers to a market or gathering where goods are bought and sold. For example, the fair was held in the town square. Fall. To drop down vertically under the influence of gravity. Also means to lose height. For example, he fell off his bike. It can also mean to happen at some point in time, such as autumn. For example, the leaves began to fall in late September. False. Not true or accurate, not genuine. For example, she pointed out that the statement was false. Family. A group of persons having common ancestors and socially recognized relations with each other. also refers to a set of related things or ideas. For example, they are part of a large family. Famous, renowned for some achievement or distinction, well known. For example, he is famous for his paintings. Far, distant in place, time, degree, or manner, also means distant from the speaker. For example, the far horizon. Fast, moving with speed, rapid in motion, also refers to being quick and efficient. For example, she drives her car fast on the highway. Fat, excessive body weight due to an accumulation of fat, also refers to a fatty substance. For example, he is trying to lose fat from his diet. Father, the male parent of a child or the person who assumes the role of a father in relation to a child. For example, he was proud to be a father to his children. Fear, an unpleasant emotion caused by the belief that someone or something is dangerous, harmful, or threatening. For example, she had fear before giving her speech. Feather, a light flexible structure growing from a bird's skin, also refers to something resembling a feather in shape and texture. For example, he admired the colorful feathers of a peacock. Feature, a prominent part or quality that marks out a person or thing, a distinctive trait. For example, she has a striking feature in her face, the large eyes. Feed, to give food to someone or something, also means to supply with nourishment. For example, he feeds his dog every day. Feel, to perceive by touch, also means to have an emotion or impression. For example, she feels the soft texture of the fabric. Female, of or relating to women and girls, female gender, also refers to a woman's role in society. For example, she is a female athlete. Fertile, rich in minerals, organic matter, or other plant nutrients, capable of producing abundant crops, also means having many children. For example, the soil is very fertile for growing vegetables. Few, not many in number, used to emphasize smallness of quantity. For example, there were only a few people at the party. Field, a large open space, also refers to an area of land used for farming or sports. For example, they played soccer on the field. Fierce, very energetic and strong in action, fierce in temper or manner, also means sharp or harsh. For example, she had a fierce argument with her friend. Fight, to struggle against someone or something in order to defeat them, also refers to combat or rivalry. For example, he fought hard to win the match. Figure, a person's form or shape as seen by eye, also refers to a number representing an amount. For example, she has a strong figure and is popular among men. File, a group of documents kept together in one place for easy reference, also refers to a metal container used for storing screws, nails, etc. For example, he filed his important documents safely. Fill, to make full or complete, to put into with something until it is full or complete. For example, she filled the glass with water. Film, a series of still pictures that, when shown in sequence, create an illusion of continuous movement, also refers to a motion picture. For example, he loves to watch films on weekends. Final, lasting forever, ultimate in time or order, last and most important, also refers to something concluding a process. For example, she is attending the final exam. Finance, the management of money and other resources, also refers to financial activities like banking, investments, etc. For example, he manages his finances carefully. Find, to discover or locate someone or something by chance or effort. For example, she found her lost keys. Fine, not having a defect, excellent in quality, also means a monetary penalty imposed as punishment for an offense. For example, the painting is fine and beautiful. She received a fine for speeding. Finger, a part of the hand terminating in a nail or claw like those of other mammals except apes and monkeys. For example, she uses her fingers to type on the keyboard. Finish, to end, also means to bring something to an end. For example, he finished his homework early. Fire, the combustion of fuel with oxygen, also refers to a weapon used in combat or hunting. For example, he started a fire in the fireplace. Firm, a commercial establishment organized as a partnership or corporation and engaged in business for profit. Also means strong, hard, or stiff. For example, she works at a large firm. First, being the first of its kind, being next after nothing else, coming before all others in order. Also refers to an initial part or stage of something. For example, he won the first prize. Fish, a cold-blooded aquatic vertebrate having gills for breathing and limbs or fin-like appendages adapted for swimming. Also refers to meat from a fish. For example, she loves to eat fresh fish. Fist, the hand curled up with the fingers bent inward toward the palm, also means a tight ball of something. For example, he made a fist to emphasize his point. Fit, to be appropriate or suitable for some purpose, also means to have one thing correspond in shape and size to another. For example, she bought shoes that fit perfectly. Fix, to repair or put back into working order, also means to adjust something so it is exactly right. For example, he fixed the broken chair. Flag, a piece of fabric with distinctive colors and patterns used as a symbol or signal, also refers to wave or flutter in the wind. For example, she waved the flag to show her support. Flat, level or even, not raised or curved, having no marked variations in level, also means a building without separate rooms. For example, she lives in an apartment on the top floor of a flat. Float, to be suspended on a liquid surface by its own weight and density, to move along with the current of water or air. Also refers to something that moves slowly through water. For example, he floated a boat on the lake. Floor, the lower side of a room, hall, or other space, also means an entire level in a building. For example, she cleaned the floor after the party. Flow, to move along as if floating, to pass in a steady, continuous stream, also refers to movement from one place to another. For example, water flows freely in a river. Flower, the reproductive organ of a plant, also means the bloom or blossom of a plant. For example, she admired the beauty of the flower in her garden. Fluid, a substance that can flow and change easily shape under external pressure. Not solid, also refers to something that flows, especially liquid. For example, oil is a fluid that lubricates machinery. Fly, to move through the air using wings, also means to travel by airplane. For example, birds fly high in the sky. She flew to Paris for her vacation. Fog, a mass of minute water droplets suspended in the air near the Earth's surface, also refers to a state or condition that obscures something. For example, the fog made it hard to see clearly. Fold, to bring together and press the edges of something so as to form layers, also means to bend paper into an origami figure. For example, she folded the letter before sending it. Follow, to come after in time or order, to pursue, to chase. Also refers to walk behind someone, especially on a journey. For example, he followed her directions carefully. Food, any nutritious substance that people or animals eat or drink as part of their diet. For example, she enjoyed a delicious meal for dinner. Fool, a person who lacks good sense, one who acts unwisely or foolishly. Also refers to an unskillful tool or implement. For example, he was called a fool for his imprudent actions. Foot, one of the parts that support the body and enable it to move about on land. Also means the lower end of something or the unit used for measuring length. For example, she stepped on her foot while walking in the dark. For, used before the purpose or result of an action, also means in favor of someone. For example, he bought a gift for his friend. Forbid, To order not to do something, to prevent by authority or command. For example, she forbids her children from playing outside after dark. Force. Physical power or strength exerted upon an object that causes it to move in the direction of application. Also refers to compelling someone by threats. For example, he used force to break open the door. Foreign. Of another country. Not domestic or national. Also means strange, unusual, or unfamiliar. For example, she learned a foreign language for her trip abroad. Forest. A large area covered with trees and undergrowth. Also refers to an assemblage of data, information, etc. For example, he walked through the forest on his camping trip. Forget. To lose memory of something previously known or experienced. To cease remembering. For example, she forgot her password for the account. Forgive. To release a person from offense, injury, or debt. To stop feeling angry with someone who has done you an injury. For example, he forgave his friend after the misunderstanding was cleared up. Form. A shape or outline of something. Also refers to a particular style or manner of doing things. For example, she filled out the form for her application. Former, that mentioned first, being no longer in existence or use but previously existing or used. Also means someone or something that was former. For example, he preferred his former job over this one. Forward. In a direction moving toward the front. Also refers to advancing in time or position. For example, she moved forward and took control of the meeting. Frame. A border surrounding an object. Also refers to the structure supporting someone's body. For example, he hung the picture in its frame. Free. Not subject to restrictions, not bound by limitations. Also means not detained or imprisoned. For example, she is free to travel wherever she wants. Freeze. To change from a liquid into a solid through cooling. Also refers to becoming extremely cold and stiff with fear. For example, the water froze in the freezer. Fresh. Newly made or produced, recently gathered, killed, etc., so as not to have lost freshness or vigor. Also means new or untouched by use. For example, he enjoys fresh bread for breakfast. Friend. A person who is well known and loved and trusted. Also refers to an ally in a struggle. For example, she considers him her closest friend. Frighten. To fill with horror or terror, to cause someone to feel intense fear. For example, he was frightened by the loud noise. From. Indicating origin or point of departure, also means because of. For example, she came from a small town in the country. Front. The part that faces forward and is usually most noticeable. Also refers to the leading part, the vanguard. For example, he stood at the front of the line. Fruit. A product formed by the bearing of plants or trees. Also refers to the seed-containing reproductive parts of a flowering plant. For example, she enjoyed fresh fruit for dessert. Fuel. Any material that can be burned to produce heat and power. Also means anything that gives energy or strength. For example, he used fuel to start the engine. Full. Having no more room for something else, completely occupied. Also means abundant in quantity, supply, etc. Ample or sufficient. For example, she drank a full glass of water. Fun, delightful recreation and amusement, enjoyable activity or pastime. For example, they had fun playing games together. Future. The time that lies ahead from the present. Also means something to be done in the coming days, weeks, etc. For example, she looks forward to a bright future. Gain. To get or acquire something. To increase in amount, size, or degree. For example, she gained weight during her pregnancy. Gallon. A unit of capacity equal to 4 quarts, 3.785 liters, used especially as a measure of liquid volumes. For example, the fuel tank holds 12 gallons. Game. An activity engaged in for sport or amusement, also refers to a contest with rules. For example, they played a game of chess. Gang, a group of people associated by mutual interests, often in crime or other illegal activities. Also means a system or arrangement of parts that operate together as a unit. For example, she joined the local sports gang. Garden, a plot of ground where plants are grown, also refers to an organized system of production and management for a specific purpose. For example, he tended his garden every weekend. Gas, a state of matter characterized by having no definite shape or volume, but exerting pressure equally in all directions on the walls of its container. Also refers to liquefied petroleum gas, LPG. For example, she filled her car with gas. Gather, to collect or assemble a number of things into one place, also means to come together for some purpose. For example, they gathered around the fire. General, pertaining to an entire class of objects or concepts, also refers to someone having broad authority and scope. For example, he gave a general overview of the plan. Gentle, mild in nature, not harsh or severe. Also means soft in sound or touch. For example, she spoke in a gentle voice. Get, to obtain or acquire something by effort or action, to reach a certain place. For example, he got the package delivered on time. Gift, a present given out of affection, respect, or esteem. Also refers to an innate natural ability. For example, she received a gift for her birthday. Girl, an immature female person who has not reached puberty. Also used as a term of endearment for any young woman. For example, she is the sweetest girl in class. Give, to transfer possession or control of something to another person, to provide help or support to someone. For example, he gave her some money. Glass, a hard, brittle, transparent, or translucent substance made by fusing silicates with alkali at a very high temperature. Also refers to a drinking vessel made of this material. For example, she used a glass for water. Global, relating to the whole world, not limited to any one region. Also means worldwide in scope and effect. For example, he is concerned about global warming. Go, to proceed from one place or situation to another, also means to move in some direction. For example, they went for a walk in the park. Goal, a specific object of desire or effort, something aimed at as an object of effort or attainment. Also refers to the target area in various games. For example, she set a goal to run a marathon next year. God, an object of worship and devotion, one who is regarded with awe and reverence. Also means someone whom you think of as having a special relationship. For example, he prayed to his God for guidance. Gold, the precious metal symbolized by the letter O, that is used in jewelry, coins, metals, etc., also refers to something of great value or quality. For example, she received an award made of gold. Good, having qualities or characteristics that are desirable, pleasing, or beneficial. Also means well done in a skillful manner. For example, he gave a good speech at the meeting. Govern, to control and direct the political affairs of a country or region through authority or power. Also refers to exercising authoritative influence over others. For example, she hopes to govern with fairness and justice. Grass, the herbaceous plants that are used for lawns and pastures. Also refers to a substance used as a substitute for natural grass in carpets or floors. For example, he mowed the grass every weekend. Gray or gray, a color midway between white and black, also means of or like wool. For example, she prefers gray clothing. Great, large in size or amount, important in influence, effect, etc., of high moral or intellectual value. Also refers to something that is very good or excellent. For example, he gave a great speech at the conference. Green, the color intermediate between black and yellow on the spectrum. also means pertaining to plants in general, growing, relating to trees and grass. For example, she loves the green of nature. Ground, a surface that forms part of the Earth's crust, also refers to the country or land ruled over by a sovereign. For example, they stood on solid ground when discussing their plans. Group, two or more persons or things regarded as forming a single aggregate, also means an organized body of people with common interests. For example, he joined a group for hiking and adventure. Grow, to develop in size or amount, also means to increase gradually by a natural process. For example, she watched the plants grow in her garden. Guarantee, a promise that if something happens you will be given compensation or other remedy, also refers to a written assurance of quality and durability. For example, he guaranteed the product would last for at least 5 years. Guard, to keep watch over, also means to protect by keeping watch. For example, she guards her belongings carefully. Guess, to form an opinion about without knowledge of facts or evidence, also refers to a wild guess or random shot. For example, he guessed the answer but wasn't sure if it was right.